Hello everyone, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, host of Reformed GGA. Normally host of Relationship and Truth, but this is my other YouTube channel, so woohoo! Today I wanted to talk about where I am with the company Kel-Tec. Those of you who have been following my stuff for a while, you know that I've bought a few Kel-Tec products, and so I just kind of wanted to give my update on them, my overall position on the company, and a review of some of the specific products as well. But before we do that, because this is Reformed GGA, because I am first and foremost and always a child of God, a Christian, we're going to start with a reading from Scripture that happens to do with the topic of weapons. This is going to be from the book of Judges, chapter 3, and we're going to start in verse 15. So Judges, chapter 3, starting in verse 15. It says, "Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. The people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab. And Ehud made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. And when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, 'I have a secret message for you, O king.' And he commanded, 'Silence,' and all his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, 'I have a message from God for you.' And he arose from his seat, and Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and the dung came out. Then Ehud went out into the porch, and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him, and locked them." That is a very interesting passage with regard to weapons rights. Covers a lot of interesting details. Covers why people would want to have weapons in the first place, especially with regard to tyranny. Now, you look through a lot of the cases in the Old Testament where those kinds of things show up, and it's almost always the case that God is restoring the nation of Israel, especially when we look at the Old Testament. Israelites had God against God's covenant with them. They broke the covenant promises, and God said the punishment for breaking that is that you guys are going to be taken over by foreign powers, and when you guys get your head screwed on straight, I'm going to restore the nation to you. And God always did it through means. The means of people who would take back the nation, and who would take back the nation, in this case, violently if necessary. And something needs to be understood here that a lot of people mess up on interpreting the Old Testament in this regard. They say, well, the Israelites are God's covenant people, so the reason why he allowed the Israelites to use warfare was because he needed to maintain his covenant people to the point where we could eventually get Jesus on down the line, and it was only for that purpose that he allowed Israel to be combative and go to war and those kinds of things, just so that eventually we could get Jesus down the line through this one particular chain. But once we get Jesus, we don't have a national people anymore, and so they don't need to go to war anymore, and so Christians should just be pacifists, basically. No, the overarching principle here isn't simply that God was restoring his people. This is very much so true. But the overarching case here is how God deals with people in general. That is, when God would restore the people of Israel through his people doing very violent things with arms of one form or another, whether it be swords, spears, whatever the case happened to be, bows and arrows, however it happened to be, the case was that he was taking his people against those who were wicked and sinful. It wasn't like he said, well, this is my people Israel, they're really special, so, you Assyrians, you Philistines, you Babylonians, whoever it happened to be at the time, yeah, I know you guys are really nice guys and whatnot, but since they're my people, y'all gotta die. I'm sorry. No, it wasn't, you are really good people, but Israel is more important to me. No, it's, you are sinful, evil people. Israel is the people that I am redeeming, and at this particular time are getting back into right relationship with me, so I'm going to favor them over you, and I'm going to give you, who are remaining in your wickedness, over to them. It was a contest not of simply who is God's chosen people, but it is a contest of righteousness. That is the reason why God allowed Israel to rise up against these people who are trying to overtake them. Wasn't simply because Israel was God's people. This was true. But it coincided with the evil of the other people. It's not just, oh, we're the chosen people, therefore we get to fight everyone. No, it was in accordance with the understanding that what these other people are doing is evil and wicked. And when the people who, and there were cases where that it didn't happen like that. The people who came into Israel were not doing the evil, wicked things that other people had done. They actually treated the Israelites fairly well. And because of that, God did not send the same kind of judgments on them, the bloody, gory violence on them that he did with those that were tyrannical. So there is a certain moderation there, but there's a more general principle that tyranny is indeed something that mankind is to fight against, using arms if necessary. It's never the preferred option, of course, but if necessary, to curtail the spread of evil and to restore the God-given rights of the people in general. Yes, tyranny can be fought violently if necessary. And in this particular case, you have someone who manufactures their own weapon, no government oversight whatsoever. He had made his own weapon to his own specifications to fit his own needs. He concealed carried it, and he also used subterfuge to get to the place where he was alone with this foreign king so that he could do what he needed to do. Basically, he was the ancient equivalent of a special ops team. Special ops teams are usually called in to take care of very specific targets, and they're called in to do that so that violence and whatnot doesn't spread unnecessarily. Yes, we're going to take care of our problem, but there's no reason to engage in a full-on war here if we can take care of the problem by just taking care of a few key people. That's what Ehud did. Yes, using force, including lethal force, is entirely biblical, but the Bible does also give precedent for trying to minimize the amount of force that would be necessary where it was applicable. And interesting, in American history, you see this as well, particularly in World War II. I'm sorry, I'm getting off the topic of Kel-Tec, but just a couple more minutes on this and then we'll get into Kel-Tec. This same idea of trying to minimize casualties, trying to minimize bloodshed as much as possible, became a major factor in World War II. We entered World War II fairly slowly because we didn't want to get involved in things if we didn't need to. But once we did get involved, we wanted things to end as quickly as possible. Yes, we're fighting against the tyranny of the Axis powers. What they're doing is evil and wrong. It needs to be stopped. We believed in that. But we were all for minimizing casualties as much as possible. And that is an interesting thing when it applies to Japan. A lot of you guys who know your history know that we dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. And the thinking behind that was that if we can drop these 2 atomic bombs on Japan, hopefully we can take out their fighting spirit enough to the point where they're not going to want to continue fighting us, so that we won't have to launch an invasion. Because if you launch an invasion and you attack mainland Japan, you're going to be fighting people on their own territory and their own homes there. It's not going to be good fighting. Lots of people are going to die on both sides. Lots and lots of bloodshed. So the Americans figured a couple of bombs that take out a couple of cities, while extremely tragic, is better than an entire country covered in blood. And so that's the route that we went. And lo and behold, Japan surrendered shortly thereafter. They indeed did not want to fight that fight. The show of force worked, and the amount of casualties on both sides was minimized, and that was a good thing to do. We fought against the tyranny of the Japanese Empire, and we also minimized the number of casualties that were necessary to end that fight. That was the thinking of at least some Americans at the time. And there are other Americans that unfortunately were very bigoted against the Japanese, and that's where you get the internment camps and things like that. But there were people who were generally concerned about them. They were not for what the Japanese were doing, but they didn't want to see unnecessary bloodshed happen either. And that balance is a very important thing for a people with a Christian worldview in general. And America in the past actually did have a generally Christian worldview. But to get into Kel-Tec, that's why we're here. I've bought a few products from Kel-Tec. In fact, I've bought 4 guns from Kel-Tec. I bought a Sub 2000 for someone other than me, and that other person has not shot the thing yet, so I can't really report on it. However, I do know from other things that I've seen online and reviews and whatnot that other people have done after a significant amount of time with the gun, that the Sub 2000 seems to be one of Kel-Tec's better products in terms of reliability. It does have some shortcomings in that its folding design, which is one of its cool things, but it's also a shortcoming in that if mounting optics to it and whatnot is very difficult. Also, it does not have a lost shot hold open, which bugs some people. And its safety system is a little bit strange. It's a crossbolt safety, which I'm not a very big fan of at all. I don't like crossbolt safeties, but for some people they're just fine. And if you are okay with crossbolt safety, then good for you. Also, its takedown is a little bit complex because you basically have to wind up taking it apart from the stock end and pulling a bunch of parts out, and it's like 9 different parts, I think, for basic field stripping. So it's a little on the complicated side. Not too terrible. You can get used to it after you've done it a few times, but still not the most convenient on the face of the planet. So I don't have any direct experience with that. I bought one, but I bought it as a gift for someone. And yes, by the way, that person is a legal gun owner, all those kinds of things. Now, this was not a straw purchase. This was as a gift to someone who is in the legal category of being able to own it, so on and so forth. Not using it for nefarious purposes. It's just, for that person, probably more of a fun plinking gun, slash possibly, depending on what that person decides to do with it, maybe a bedside gun. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But the person hasn't got around to shooting it yet because they had gone through surgery and spent a lot of time recuperating. And going shooting right after a surgery is not generally recommended, especially where they open up your lower abdomen and you start shooting and there's recoil, and it's not a good idea. So I don't really have a whole lot of direct experience to report on that one, or even from someone that I know that I would trust their direct experience with. So we'll leave that one off to the side. As to the 3 other guns that I have a RDB that I also bought, and technically it was actually the very first Kel-Tec that I bought. And I don't have it with me today, but it is the rifle downward ejecting bullpup that Kel-Tec puts out. And when I first got the gun, I was actually relatively impressed with it. Kind of cool operation features, and I especially love that it was a bullpup. I like guns that are good in close quarters because that's the main venue in which I would have to use one if I was going to use it for self-defense. I'm usually either in hotels or in my apartment, and so something that can get in and around tight spaces fairly well really appeals to me. Also, it was a gun that was truly fully ambidextrous. You could even change the charging handle around over to the other side so that you could really make it fully ambidextrous. The spent casings eject out of the bottom, so it's not left or right ejection. It's bottom ejection. That's why it's called a downward ejecting bullpup, rifle downward ejecting bullpup. Bullpup. That's what RDB stands for. Lots of really cool things about it. And in the first time or first couple of times that I took it out shooting, I thought it was pretty cool, and it seemed to work decently well. There was a few rounds that it seemed to malfunction on, but I thought that at the time I thought there was just issues with getting the gas system properly adjusted. The gun had gotten dirty or something, and so the gas system wasn't working quite right, etc., etc. That's what I attributed it to. However, and so I didn't really think a whole lot of it at the time, and I thought, well, I'll go ahead and I'll get other Kel-Tec products because this one seems to be working just fine. It's great. And so I got other Kel-Tec products, and I wound up getting the CMR30 and the PMR30, both of which I have with me today, and so those will be on the screen shortly. But to get back to the RDB, after I'd gone through about the first 200 rounds with it, it got to the point, and in that period, especially at the beginning, I was thinking, you know, this is pretty good. You know, Kel-Tec seems like it's okay. And it was also in that period of the first 200 rounds going through the RDB that I'd gotten the sub 2000 for the other person who wound up having to go into surgery and has not had the chance to shoot it yet. But it was all in that period that I started getting these other Kel-Tec products because the RDB seemed to be working fine. But after about 200, maybe 300 rounds through it, I started getting light primer strikes, and it got to the point where every single round that I put in the gun would result in a light primer strike. It would not fire. So I'm thinking, well, that's not good. So I looked around online, is anybody else having problems with this? And there were some people who said they had similar problems, and they had ordered a new firing pin from Kel-Tec, and that fixed the problem. So I figured, oh, well, that's a pretty simple fix. The firing pin on the Kel-Tec RDB is pretty easy to get to. It's not at all like it is on a lot of pistols. A lot of pistols, you basically have to tear the entire upper slide apart. You know, it's kind of a pain. But on 5.56 designs, you know, you've got the bolt in there, and the bolts you can access pretty easily and tear everything apart pretty easily. So I was like, yeah, I can do that. That's not a problem. So I went and ordered the firing pin, put it in, took it out to shoot it, and it's working again. Yay! Well, in that same day of shooting, I got a few more light primer strikes, and that was rather disconcerting. But on top of that, so the old problem is now back. It's doing the light primer strike thing again. But on top of that, the charging handle is now actually catching on the action piston, on the gas piston. And actually, I don't know if you guys can see that, but I wound up actually chewing up my forefinger a little bit. It's actually healed pretty good now, but yeah, a couple of weeks ago I was messing with it, trying to get it to work, and the charging handle kept catching up on the gas piston, so it didn't want to go back, and this is having the gun loaded, and it's not like I can, you know, do anything with the gun in that state. You know, I don't want to transport a loaded gun, certainly don't want to store a loaded gun, and so I had to get the round out, and so I have to operate the charging handle, and yeah, I chewed up my finger pretty good because it's catching on that thing. It does not want to budge. And when I got the gun home, I took it apart, cleaned it, still wasn't working right, and so that's the condition that it is in now. At first I thought that it was my best Kel-Tec, and it turns out that out of all of them, it's probably going to be the hardest to repair. In fact, I'm probably going to have to wind up sending it into Kel-Tec to get it fixed, and I really hate that prospect. For one, the time, the whole mailing issue, possibly having to go through FFL depending on how they do it. It's just a royal pain to have to take it back. When you get a gun, you want it to run. And with Kel-Tec, I know that there's issues with them, so I thought, well, hopefully it'll at least be a relatively minor issue that I can fix myself, like replacing a firing pin. I can do that. If that's all that it takes to get the gun to run fine, not a big deal. $10 for a firing pin, $4 shipping and handling. That's as much as, you know, one magazine going through it, so that's not a big deal at all. But where it's looking like now, I'm going to actually have to ship it out, wait for it to get shipped back in, deal with the whole mail process. That's a major pain, especially for me where I'm gone so often. It's not looking very good. And so I'm very disappointed in the RDB right now. It is a cool concept. A short 5.56 rifle that is at least sufficiently accurate out to 200 yards. And it's roughly a 3 MOA shooter. So sufficiently accurate to up to 300 yards, I would say, which gives you about a 6-inch group at that distance. That's pretty effective for 5.56. And like I said, fully ambidextrous, which is an important thing to me because when I go to the range, I often like to drag along other people if I can. And a decent number of people that I know and shoot with are lefties, and so having a gun that is fully ambidextrous so that a left-handed person can use it with ease is really appealing. So I really like that, but right now it's not working. It used to have just one problem, the light primer strikes. Now it has two. It's the light primer strikes and the charging handle is catching on the gas piston. And it will chew up your finger. Sadness right there. So, sub 2000, I bought it for someone else. Yes, someone who's entirely legal, but that one was a gift. They haven't had a chance to use it yet, so I don't know about that. The RDB, which was my very first Kel-Tec, initially it looked really good, but now not so much, especially considering the price. The price on an RDB, the kind that I got, the one with the tactical vertical grip, which is very similar to all the other RDBs, except for vertical grips. That's like the only major difference between all the different models, because they both will, all of them will accept the same size magazine and those kinds of things. That's the significant cosmetic feature that differs between all of them, is the vertical grip. But yeah, with that particular model, yeah, that one usually costs around $1,000, and I paid pretty close to that. And yeah, given that it broke down after 200-300 rounds and then got it fixed and then another 150 rounds or so into it, it went back to its original problem and developed another problem. Yeah, that's not a good investment. Let's just be honest about that. So if Kel-Tec is able to get it back to me in a timely manner after I send it out, I haven't done that yet, but if they're able to take care of it and they're willing to take care of it and they step up to the plate on it, frankly, I'll forgive them, because with Kel-Tec, I don't expect out-of-the-box performance with the company. You look online, they're not an out-of-the-box company. If you think that there is an immediate threat against your life or you're going to have to defend yourself, don't get a Kel-Tec. That's not really the niche that Kel-Tec really specializes in, especially for a lot of their bigger things. Instead, their market is much more so the recreational market, and that's kind of why I got the 223. I don't really plan on using it, at my apartment for home defense at all, just because I don't like something that's that big and that loud, especially in a really confined space. And granted, you could get a silencer, but that's all the ATF regs and all that kind of thing, and I don't want to mess with that. It's just easier to get a smaller gun that isn't quite as powerful, that's not quite as noisy. Because believe it or not, people who have fired rifles indoors have actually damaged their hearing with just one shot. And some of the spaces that I'm in are fairly confined, and some of the spaces in my apartment are extremely confined, and sometimes firing a rifle round in a home doesn't do anything to the person's hearing. Sometimes they'll be able to do it multiple times and there's no significant issues. Other times there are, and it, to a great extent, depends on the person. Our ears are not all made exactly the same. Some of us are more sensitive than others, and some of us, our hearing is frankly more fragile than others. The only problem is that you never know that until you actually get to the moment. You don't know if firing the rifle round inside of an enclosed space is going to be okay for you. You're still going to be able to hear afterwards or not. You don't know it until you try it, and I'd rather just not take the risk. So going with something that's a little bit lower powered, that is not as likely to do that, cost-benefit analysis, that makes more sense to me. So I was never really considering the 223 for home defense anyways. It is more of a recreational gun for me, so I am ticked that I spent $1,000 on it, and within 500 rounds, it's developed two problems that take it out of action. If there's a light primer strike, it's not going to fire, and if the charging handle locks up, with the gas piston especially, it's not just that the charging handle locks up, it's that it's attached to the gas piston, and if that locks up, and that gun's not working, that's a very major failure. So either way, it takes it out of any kind of usefulness, and I'm pretty ticked off about that. So that leaves us with two guns, and these were actually the ones that I was the most hesitant to get. And it turns out that they were actually probably the best guns to get from Kel-Tec. The first one that I got, and you guys have seen this before, is the CMR30. And when I was very first going out to buy guns for myself, this is actually the gun that I wanted. And the reason why I wanted it is because this gun reminds me a whole lot of an MP7. You cut off the barrel and, you know, without that on it, it looks a lot like an MP7 does. And by the way, this has been cleared, so for those of you who are concerned about safety and the fact that I just muzzled myself, it has been completely cleared. There's nothing in it whatsoever. It is a safe gun. But very MP7-like, and so I kind of just wanted it for the cool factor. It's a cool looking gun, and you know, it's a fairly small round that it shoots. It's 22 Magnum, so kind of technically a rifle round, but a very low powered rifle round by comparison, and so pretty soft shooter, pretty easy shooter. And so I really wanted to get this first as my very first gun that I would buy for myself, but I just saw so many reports online that, you know, Kel-Tecs aren't reliable and this, that, and the other thing is like, yeah, you know, after I've got some decently reliable guns, maybe then I'll come back around to it and get it. Well, I got the RDB, I got the Sub 2000, and those up to that point seemed like they were doing okay, so I went ahead and pulled the trigger on getting this. And as reported at first, this thing had all kinds of issues with not wanting to feed the ammunition properly. And it turns out that it was a magazine issue. So let me go ahead and get one of those in here. Stay. Alright, and here is the magazine that the CMR30 uses. And in the process of firing these things, the rounds would bind up inside the magazine and they wouldn't call them all the way up. And so it doesn't matter if the action on top of that is working just fine. If the bullets don't feed all the way up, it's not going to fire because there's nothing to fire. So after figuring out that it was a magazine issue, I took the magazines apart, and inside of the magazine, and of course there's a follower, like pretty much all magazines, there's some kind of a follower in there. And these followers have little guide rails that keep them from tilting over. With this kind of round, with it being a rimmed cartridge, you need to have that. But it turns out in the magazines that those rails that help keep the magazine from twisting back and forth were wide enough that they would actually bind up in the magazine housing itself. So I just sanded those down and put a little lubrication in the magazines, not a whole lot, just normal semi-auto lube that I use on my guns. Forget the brand that makes that lube. It's a good lube, actually. Had very good luck with it so far. But yeah, did that small modification, just sanding down the rails, lubing them up just a little bit, and out of the CMR30, it's been running great. In fact, the past several times that I've taken the gun out, I haven't had any malfunctions with the magazine itself. There's been there is one issue that it does have, and that is that on the last round, there is last round hold open, which is a good thing. But sometimes when you do last round hold open and you put the new magazine in and you bring the charging handle back, sometimes the bolt won't come all the way forward. The release will actually stay in the up position and won't allow it to come forward. And that's easy enough to remedy. You know, if it's locked back when you go to pull on the charging handle, you just push down on the release button and it takes care of that. I personally like guns where you can just operate the charging handle and you don't have to worry about the bolt release. I don't like worrying about the bolt release if I don't have to. On this one, it's small enough that the weights of the release itself won't take it down, and so if you're just trying to run the charging handle, it won't do it. But other than that, I haven't had any malfunctions with this thing for quite a while, and frankly, this thing is lots of fun to shoot. The optic that I have on here is actually pretty good. It's a hollow sun. They're about $200. This is the solar supplemented model and solar sensitive model, and about a $200 optic, and this thing will last for more than a year. Always on, always ready to go. And last time I took this thing out shooting at distance, I was able to get, and I showed you guys this, for those of you who follow my Facebook page, you'll know this. I was able to get hits within about a 4-inch circle. Not that I was aiming at a 4-inch circle, I was aiming at an 8-inch circle, but the group wound up being about 4 inches at 100 yards. And given that this is a 2 MOA dot and the gun itself is about 2 MOA, 2 times 2 is 4. That's about what you would expect with those kinds of things. MOA error tends to multiply. That's pretty good. And frankly, I'm not the best shooter in the world. In the hands of someone who's a better shooter than I am using this red dot, you could probably expect a 3-inch group. And if you had a better optic on there that works better at distance, you know, a proper scope, you could probably get 1.5 to 2 MOA out of it pretty easily. But for me, I've become so confident in this thing because, like I said, it just has not had any serious malfunction for such a long time. And the issue with the bolt staying locked back, like I said, is really easy to remedy as long as you just hit the bolt release as you're charging it. And there's not been any significant issue with this thing for multiple range trips, and I'm at the point where I'm confident taking it with me as my bedside gun. When I'm out on trips and out and about, this is the gun that is with me. It's something that I can shoulder. It's something that is very easy to aim in pretty much all lighting conditions. It doesn't do really good if the target has a lot of light coming from it itself. But even at that, just looking through the hole, I still know at least roughly where that dot is going to be. When I'm looking through the sight, it looks like it's about 1/2 inch to 1 inch off of the front end of the gun. So even if I can't see the dot because of light from the other side, I still know roughly where it is, and I can still get a pretty good shot in. Lots of confidence in this gun, actually. I didn't really expect that when I first got it. I thought, well, you know, lots of people that I've known, well, not known personally, but that I've examined, you know, online and whatnot, have really had issues with this thing. So it's like, well, I'll get all the other reliable guns first, and then I'll mess around with this. And it turns out this is the one that I'm taking with me everywhere because I can shoulder it, I can get very accurate shots off with it, and while the .22 Magnum is not a particularly powerful round, it is enough to get the job done. And like I said, it's relatively quiet compared to like a .223 or something like that. And it's also relatively low recoil, which for me is a big thing. It turns out that I'm very recoil sensitive, and so a gun that does not recoil very much has a lot of appeal to me. And just so that you guys can see what I shoot out of it, in the CMR30, what I've found works the best for me is the CCI 40 grain Maximag hollow points. Try to get that so that you can see the hollow point on it. And these are not top performing hollow points by any means, but at sufficient speed these will expand a little bit. And the CMR30 does have enough barrel length on it that you can get expansion out of these. But the main thing that I use these ones for, the reason why I use these over any other kinds, because this gun is actually pretty accurate with these, at least in my experience. Now that I've got it sighted in for about 100 yards, like I said, for me about a 4-inch group at 100 yards, which isn't great, but for me it meets more than my needs. Sighting it in that way allows me to hit close-in targets with this particular round at pretty much any distance inside of 100 yards. So from 0 to 100 yards, I can hit pretty much any 4-inch target as long as I do my part with this particular round. And that's the reason why I use this round, is it allows me to be accurate at pretty much any distance. So I really like that. And so that wound up being a fantastic thing. And another cool thing about it is that these magazines are 30 round magazines and they're flush fitting. That is, they don't stick out of the bottom of the gun. They are the length of, I'll just go ahead and load it. I won't chamber around, but just load it. But yeah, it fits into the magwell flush. Nothing extra coming out of it. I do a safety check. Not that I really need to, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. But very inobtrusive. So, and for me, this is a big thing. Being in hotels all the time, the environment that I'm sleeping in is different all the time. So, you know, you get up, there's a bump in the night, something that you need to take care of, possibly. Having something that's not going to get hung up on furniture and various items in the room is really quite advantageous. Both of the handles fit pretty basically flush in my hand. The back end is, of course, shouldered. The only thing I need to worry about really is the end of the barrel, but it doesn't come out that much further than my hand does. It's basically just a span past the front of my hand, so I really don't have to worry about it getting hung up on anything. There's not a giant magazine sticking out that it might catch on the end of a table or something like that. Very flush fitting, don't really have to worry about a whole lot with it. And like I said, 30 rounds right there in your hand is pretty cool. And like I said, that thing's, for me, I can hit any 4-inch target within 100 yards. That's my group size, my maximum group size. A lot of times within 25 yards or less, if I'm actually taking my time, I can usually get that down to an inch, which is what you would expect. If you're 4 inches at 100 yards, proportionally, you would expect an inch at 25 yards, and it does it without having to change any settings or anything. It'll do it with the round that I showed you. So I like that. Now the other Kel-Tec that I got was the PMR 30. By the way, yes, this one has been safety checked as well. See, nothing in the mag well, nothing in the chamber, and I've actually become pretty happy with this one, and this one has actually been traveling with me as well. For handguns, I used to carry a 9mm all the time, and I still carry a 9mm fairly often as well. But the big reason why I wound up going to this one is because this one is so much lighter. It is a very, very light handgun, completely loaded with a full magazine. By the way, it takes the same magazine, so it's, whoops, flush fitting. And you do need to listen for the click. But 30 rounds, flush fitting magazine, and in total, with that full flush fitting magazine in there, 30 rounds, it's only 20 ounces. That's not bad. And as far as reliability is concerned, you guys who've followed my Facebook stuff, you know that when I first got it, it definitely had some hiccups. And it still has a hiccup every now and again. It's not a 100% reliable gun. And with rimfire guns, I expect that. My very first gun that I got was a Smith & Wesson 1522, which is a 22 LR gun, and it's basically kind of an AR-looking gun, but it's a 22. And with it, I get malfunctions from time to time as well. I can usually count on about 1 every 4 magazines. And so that's about 1 in 100 on that one that it'll malfunction for whatever reason. Sometimes it's a problem with the ammunition, sometimes it's a problem with the ammunition feeding out of the magazine properly, so on and so forth. And I've just kind of come to expect that with rimfire, that every once in a while, and fairly often, there's going to be something that happens. And I would consider Smith & Wesson, who makes the M&P 1522, I would consider Smith & Wesson to be a pretty decent company. And so if they're a decent company and they're putting out a product that has a failure rate, a malfunction rate of 1 in 100, then for that kind of gun, I would accept that as acceptable. And this PMR 30 is in that same range. Last time I took it shooting, for example, I put 4 magazines through it, and I had 1 malfunction, where the gun would not fire again after I had fired it. Now, the gun does do other kind of weird hiccupy things, and also just because the slide stop on it is so small, because it's such a small caliber, yeah, it doesn't necessarily always want to release when you pull back on the slide. Sometimes it does, like that, but sometimes it won't always want to come forward. And so for me, I've just gotten in the habit of whenever I go to release the slide, I push down on the button and I operate the slide or the charging handle, and that takes care of it. So push in the button, operate the slide, it's good to go. So I've gotten used to that, but yeah, it still does have a failure rate of technically a little bit better than 1 in 100 because these are 30 round mags, so 1 in 120. I consider that to be acceptable. Lots of people would not consider that to be acceptable for self-defense, but for me it's kind of one of those things where I analyze what the the probability of having to use it versus the expense and weight of having to carry it. Because another combination that I thought of was carrying one of my 9mm as my handgun and then getting, like, say, the Sub 2000, something like that, as my bedside gun, something that would be relatively compact to take, but has a little bit harder hitting caliber. 9mm or the Sub 2000 also will sometimes come in 40 cal as well. So I could have gone with a combination like that, but it would have been that much heavier, and you have to remember that I'm lugging these things around to every single hotel that I'm in, and a lot of the hotels do not have elevators, so it's up the stairs, down the stairs, you know, and those kinds of things. That's kind of a pain. And so going with the 22 Magnum setup that I have saves me about a pound as far as the guns loaded would be concerned. And if you start going beyond that, with beyond just having the guns loaded with one full magazine each, you start going multiple magazines beyond that, and the 22 Magnum in these polymer magazines really starts to win out over 9mm real quickly. Right now I'm actually carrying about, when I go out with them, I carry about 300 rounds in magazines. They're loaded, ready to go, of 22 Magnum. It's really easy to have, and people say, well, why do you need that for self-defense? And probably I don't. A single 30-round magazine would be more than sufficient in most cases. But in some of the places where I go, I'm lucky enough to find a gun range, or I'm able to meet up with a friend who has a privately owned place where you can go and shoot and whatnot, and I like having a lot of rounds so that I can go and shoot. And having them already loaded up, ready to go, and not have them weigh a ton is really nice. That I could not do as easily with a 9mm. There are options out there that would be very travel capable. Like I said, the Sub 2000 in 9mm, or 40 cal if you don't like 9mm, would be a pretty capable system. But this is what I kind of got into, and I'm not necessarily going to buy a completely different gun if this will work. And like I said, with this one, which is my primary bedside gun, this thing, I am very confident with this thing. Hitting, like I said, pretty much any target that I would care to be able to hit within 100 yards is nice. And now, granted, people with a 223 or whatnot, or people who are just more accurate than I am, could probably do significantly better than me. Stay. Oops. Well, I didn't look where I put it very well. Sadness. But you know, there are obviously people that are more accurate than me, but for me, I am really recoil sensitive. And like I said, I'm also concerned about hearing loss in small and close spaces. And frankly, 223s don't travel well. It's really hard to find a good 223 that will actually pack up into the size that I need. So that's a problem. And then, like I said, there are other options in handgun calibers. The Sub 2000 is one of those options. And weight-wise, it just doesn't make as much sense. I mean, my odds of encountering a situation where I'm going to have to defend myself is pretty low. You know, you follow a few basic rules, you know, a little bit of preventative maintenance, and you can usually solve most problems. You know, don't go to bad places at bad times with bad people to do bad things, and more often than not, you'll be okay. So I'm not super worried about self-defense, but I do want to take some precautions that way, and 22 Magnum will get the job done. And a 22 Magnum system with a pistol and a carbine is going to be lighter than most other systems, 9mm systems, definitely 223 systems, so on and so forth. And so for me, it makes sense and it works. I'm not saying that it's perfect, and if I was home all the time, yeah, this is not the bedside gun that I use at home. At home, I use a 9mm Tavor. And again, the reason why it's a 9mm, not 223, is because I'm working in confined spaces. I don't want to go through the ATF process of getting the silencer, or at least not yet. And so having something that doesn't have quite the concussive blast on it, that will be more, not that it is, but more hearing safe, appeals to me. And that's one of the issues with your hearing. You don't know if you're going to be one of those people that has one bad thing happen to him and your hearing is gone, versus someone who could take, firing off multiple rounds of .306 in a 4x4 cubicle and be just fine. Different people have different tolerances. Our ears are not all made the same way. They do not have the same exact tolerances. For me, it's just not worth the risk. Now, granted, yes, if there's a bump in the night, something happens, I'm probably not going to have the time to put in earplugs and those kinds of things, and taking some reasonable precautions that way makes sense to me. And then also, another big thing why I got into pistol calibers over rifle calibers initially was because the cost is low. These 22 Magnum rounds are relatively inexpensive. They're about as much as 9mm rounds, significantly lower than 223. And like I said, they also don't have the concussion force there, don't quite have as much recoil, although 9mm out of a carbine can be pretty much just as bouncy, if not more sometimes, than a 223. It is still technically less overall recoil because the cartridge doesn't have as much energy, but 9mm carbines do tend to be pretty bouncy because of the blowback operation. So you don't necessarily gain a ton there, but it is still better overall as far as just the ergonomics of handling it. I do feel more comfortable behind a 9mm than a 223. And I did want to show you the round combination that I use in the PMR-30 in the handgun. I actually use two different rounds. I stagger them. The one on top there is the Hornady Critical Defense round. And this actually opens up pretty well out of the PMR-30. There's been lots of people who have done ballistic tests with PMR-30s. And the Hornady round actually opens up pretty good to about the size of a .38. That hollow point actually does pretty good. So if you're going to shoot somebody with ball ammo with a .38, it comes up being pretty close to this out of the PMR as far as expansion is concerned. Penetration usually isn't as deep. It's like 12 to 13 inches. Which is not great, but at least it meets the FBI specs, the minimum side. So not a bad self-defense round. But like I said, I usually stagger it with this one, and this is the CCI MaxiMag 40 grain. The Hornady is a 45 grain. This one's a 40 grain, and it goes a little bit faster, and this one is solid. It is not a hollow point. This one is a full metal jacket. And the reason why I use these ones is because these ones usually have better penetration, around 16 inches or so. And 16 inches is getting a little bit further into what the FBI would recommend. The FBI recommends a penetration depth of 12 to 18 inches. And both of these rounds technically will get you there. This one's kind of at the lower end of that spectrum. This one's typically at the higher end of the spectrum. And so between the two, you can get a decent combination of expansion and penetration, albeit in two different rounds, but that's kind of the compromise that you have to take when you use a real small caliber like that. You're either going to get expansion or penetration, not usually both. So the combination is what allows you to do what you need to do to the target to bring it down, which is also why you have a 30-round magazine, is so that you can put multiple rounds on target. And that's the thing with either of these guns. I would not be planning on shooting a single round. I would plan on shooting until the threat is gone. I would hope it would be until the threat runs away. And that solves a lot of problems for me in a lot of ways, but if need be, multiple 22 rounds will take someone down just as much as a 9mm or any other pistol caliber will. And like I said, 223, confined space is not always a very good thing. And then also finding a 223 that is reliable, that I can take with me, that's of a good portable size, is kind of hard to do. Because this thing, when I get it all folded up, It's about 24 inches long. It's a little bit less than that. And that's about the maximum size that I would want to tote around with me. That's about as big as I'm willing to go. A lot of, like, say, the AR pistols and whatnot that they make now, they're usually going to be a little bit longer than this, and they're also usually going to be heavier than this as well. This is about 3.8 pounds, plus the weight of the optic, whatever that is. But I also took off the default sights that are on it, so there's some wind loss there. So 3.8 pounds and some change. And of course the vertical foregrip, but that's not a very heavy foregrip. That's about as much as I would want to take in this combination. So 20 ounces here, 3.8 pounds here. Like I said, for me, that's about the maximum that I like to cart around, because, like I said, I have to go up and down stairs with these things. And frankly, most of the time I'm sitting in a car, and so I don't exactly get a whole lot of work out there, and so something that's relatively light is better than not. But these I've actually been pretty satisfied with. The CMR30, like I said, for the past several times taking it out with multiple magazines through it each time, 100%. Like I said, the bolt does have a tendency to stay locked back unless you actually push down on the bolt release button, but that's pretty easy to remedy. And then the PMR30, it does malfunction, but usually only about once in 4 magazines. For me, I consider that acceptable, given that I don't really anticipate having to use it that much. For me, that's an acceptable failure rate. Other people would say that's way too high. But given how rare a self-defense encounter it typically is, and given that this gun is so much lighter than almost any other gun that you could get that would be in the same size category, and especially for the round count that you're getting, 30 rounds in a magazine, I'm willing to take the loss on that one. And of course, both of these guns have the advantage of being really fun to shoot. 22 Magnum is a great round, and it's really fun. Relatively low recoil. It's fairly flat shooting, and so you get, once you get it basically sighted in, figure out where the sights are, you can hit targets at a good range of distances without having to make any significant adjustments. It's wonderfully fun that way. And so, yeah, that's where I am with Kel-Tec. A couple of their products I love, especially the CMR30. This thing, for me, with the modifications to the magazine, has been super, 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 super reliable lately. Very confident in that gun. The PMR30, I did have to make the same kind of adjustments to its magazines as I did with the CMR30, and then on top of that, I had to get the kind of reliability that I want out of it, I had to put just a little bit of super glue on the magazine catch. The magazine catch is on the back on these ones. And I don't know how well you'll be able to see it, but there's actually a thin line of super glue that I put on the bottom of the catch to make sure that it would actually push up all the way into the gun, get good contact with the bottom of the slide, and that's what's helped it run reliably. But that's fairly easy modifications, most of them doing with the magazines. Taking apart the magazine, sanding the rails, and then in the case of the handgun, putting a little bead of super glue on the bottom of the mag catch so that it'll push the magazine further up and make it that much more reliable. Relatively easy modifications, I don't mind them. And like I said, the worst reliability that I've had under normal operating conditions is one malfunction in 4 magazines with the pistol, and then normal operating conditions with the CMR, I have not had a malfunction with that thing for many, many times taking it out. That doesn't mean that it's impossible. It's still a rimfire round, and you can still get ignition problems and whatnot from time to time. But it's doing pretty good right now, and I have every confidence in it, using it defensively, but primarily, like with all of my guns, primarily they're recreational. And 22 Magnum is just a fun round to shoot. It really is. Very low recoil, very flat shooting, makes for like the perfect combination of being able to go out and hit what you're aiming at pretty much every single time, as long as you do your part. That's what I love about these guns. They're very, very, very good in the recreational scale. And they happen for me to be to the point where I would trust them in a self-defense situation if I had to do that with them. But I wouldn't say that they're ideal for that, but for my particular situation where I'm going from hotel to hotel all the time, having something that's light is more important to me than having, you know, the biggest, strongest caliber there is. If it's something that's light and easy to transport with me, and it's something that I'm relatively accurate with, that's good enough for me, because when it comes to handguns, accuracy is king. Even with the .22 Magnum, as long as you're accurate with it, you can do what you need to do. And with these ones, I am more than enough and more than accurate enough, especially in room-sized distances. Easily be able to hit a critical spot on the human body with them, no problem. Complete confidence in that. And in self-defense situations, that's what you want. Something that you're confident in. Yeah, it might not be the most powerful round in the world, and I admit I'm extremely recoil sensitive. That's why I'm liking even .22 mag over 9mm. A 9mm, it doesn't pack a huge punch, but that's how recoil sensitive it turns out I am. If I want to be able to get good, easy, accurate shots, that's where I am. But it's doable, but primarily I like them because they're recreational. Okay. It is really hard to beat these guns as far as the fun factor is concerned. And when it comes to Kel-Tec as a whole, that's basically my opinion. Kel-Tec has really innovative designs, but they're frankly not overly reliable. And in my personal experience, at least 1 out of 4 turns out to be a dud. That's where I am with the RDB right now. It's a dud. Maybe I send it into Kel-Tec and they fix it all up, and then I take it and I shoot 500 rounds through it and it works out just flawlessly and continues running from there on. Great. If that's what happens, that's great. But right now my experience is at least 1 in 4 of the guns just winds up not being worth it. 2 in 4, my CMR30 and my PMR30, you need to make some modifications to, but they're relatively easy modifications that you can make at home. You take apart the magazine, you sand down the rails on the follower, and in the case of the pistol, you put a little bit of super glue on the mag catch, and it's good to go, or at least sufficiently good to go. So you take that for what it is, I guess. Kel-Tec at best for me is primarily recreational. Now, if you happen to fiddle around with the gun enough and you can get it to the point where it is super reliable after you do everything to it that you need to, then yeah, go ahead and run it for self-defense. But primarily, I look at them as auxiliary guns that are fun at the range. That is my opinion on Kel-Tec right now. They would not be my primary self-defense guns, especially out of box. Like I said, after you've broken them in, you've put several hundred rounds through them to make sure that you know what all the possible malfunctions are and that you've taken care of the possible malfunctions. Then, yeah, you can think about using it in a self-defense use like I've done here, and I've tested both of these guns very thoroughly. I know what to expect. I know what the parameters are. I know what is necessary to make them run well. But out of the box, I would not trust a Kel-Tec to save my life. Okay, I went into buying Kel-Tec thinking recreational. I don't really want to use 223 in the self-defense role, but the RDB was a cool gun and I thought it'd be fun at the range. And when it works, it is. Right now it's not working. .22 Magnum, also really fun at the range, relatively inexpensive too. It's about as much as 9mm. And those actually turned out to be pretty fantastic, but it took quite a bit of tweaking to the magazines to get them to run right. And with the pistol, I still have a malfunction every now and again. Like I said, about 1 malfunction every 4 magazines. That's 1 in 120. That's not great. And then for the sub 2000 that I got the other person, still don't have any word on that one, so I'm going to give Kel-Tec the benefit of the doubt on that one and say that one's probably okay. So 1 in 4 is complete dud, pretty much a waste of your money. 2 out of 4, you can get to the point where they're actually pretty decent, but it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of manipulation, a little bit of troubleshooting. The 1 in 4 is kind of a question mark right now, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one, in that most people who get sub 2000 seem to like them and don't seem to have any major issues with them. So that will probably be the case here as well. So that's my opinion on Kel-Tec. If you get a Kel-Tec, go into it with both eyes open, realizing that, at least in my experience, 1 in 4 is a dud, and about half of them are probably going to need some kind of tweaking on your part. They are not good out of the box guns. They are not guns, especially out of the box, that you want to rely on for self-defense. Now, after tweaking them and going through all that with them, you might get to the point, like I am with my CMR30 and my PMR30, where I'm confident enough to use them. But that is after a lot of testing and also out of a lot of modification of the key components that are giving me problems. Okay, out of the box, they're not good for self-defense. There's a chance, in my experience, 1 in 4 chance, that it's just not going to be worth the trouble. And so you take your pick on that one. I still like Kel-Tec in that they really have some innovative ideas. It is innovation for the common man. The question, though, is, how much is that innovation worth to you in comparison to reliability? Because in my experience so far, reliability with Kel-Tec is definitely an issue. Take that for what it is. I still like Kel-Tec. I think that they have a lot of potential as a company and that their products have a lot of potential. But potential, as far as actually something that I would rely on for self-defense without some major testing going into it, no. Like I said, you can get these things to run well enough to use them for self-defense, but out of the box, I would never trust a Kel-Tec with my life. Down the road, having tested it a while, yeah, I would, and I do. But not out of the box. And like I said, 1 in 4, pretty much a complete fail at this point. Like I said, I might send in the RDB to Kel-Tec and they might fix it up for me and send it back perfect and it just runs flawlessly from then on. And if so, I'll change my view at that time. But right now, as far as being able to fix it yourself and do things on it on your own and do it on your own time, 1 in 4 complete failure, 2 out of 4 need some adjustment, 1 in 4 question mark. Don't know at this point. All right, that's my opinion on Kel-Tec. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Bye.